Why most people stay poor. Right now, while you're watching this, over 3 billion people on Earth are living on less than $6.85 a day. And here's the thing nobody talks about. Most of them are working full-time, every single day. So the question isn't why poor people are lazy. The question is, why does the system keep them poor no matter how hard they work? America is booming. The war is over. Factories are humming. A man with a high school diploma can walk into a steel mill on Monday morning, and by Friday, he's earning enough to buy a house, raise 3 kids, and retire with a pension. That world felt like proof. Proof that if you worked hard, you'd be okay. But that world was an anomaly. A 30-year blip in the 10,000-year history of human economic life. Here's the number that should stop you cold. In 1978, a CEO earned about 30 times what their average worker made. By 2023, that same gap had exploded to over 350 times. The work didn't change. The hours didn't change. The gap just grew, quietly, while everyone was told to work harder. This is the first trap, and it has a name. It's called the productivity pay divorce. Between 1979 and 2020, American worker productivity rose by nearly 62%. Real wages for the bottom half of earners? They rose by less than 18%. The workers produced more. They got paid almost the same. And nobody in a suit on television called it what it was. A theft. To understand why poverty persists, you have to go back further than your parents. Further than your grandparents. You have to go back to when wealth itself was invented as a system. In medieval Europe, peasants had something we don't often acknowledge: common land. Shared forests. Rivers. Fields where anyone could grow food. It wasn't wealth exactly, but it was security. Then, starting in the 1500s, something called the Enclosure Movement began. Piece by piece, the English aristocracy legally seized that common land and fenced it off as private property. Peasants who had sustained themselves for generations were suddenly trespassers on land their families had worked for centuries. They had 2 choices: starve or sell their labor for whatever a factory owner would pay. The modern wage economy wasn't born from innovation. It was born from the elimination of alternatives. This pattern repeated itself across the globe. In colonial India, the British systematically dismantled local textile industries, industries that employed millions, to create a captive market for British cloth. In Africa, colonial tax systems forced subsistence farmers into cash economies, compelling them to work in mines and plantations for foreign corporations just to pay taxes on their own land. The poverty we see today in the global South is not a failure of those cultures. It is the inheritance of that extraction. Here's where it gets deeply uncomfortable. Because the external traps, the structural ones, are only half the story. The other half lives inside your head. In 2013, economists Sindel Mullainathan and Eldar Shaffer published a landmark study. They found that poverty doesn't just drain your bank account. It drains your cognitive bandwidth. Think about it this way. You have a mental budget. When you have money, financial decisions are a small line item in that budget. When you're broke, every decision, every bus fare, every grocery choice, every bill, consumes enormous mental energy. The result? Your IQ, functionally, drops. Not because you're less intelligent. Because you're managing scarcity at all times. They tested this. They gave the same IQ tests to the same sugarcane farmers in India. Once before harvest, when money was tight, and once after harvest, when they'd been paid. The same people scored significantly higher after they had financial security. Poverty literally makes you worse at escaping poverty. And then there's what psychologists call scarcity mindset. When you've never had financial cushion, your brain learns to prioritize the immediate over the future. Not because you're irrational. Because when you're one missed paycheck from eviction, the future is a luxury you cannot afford to think about. This is why telling poor people to just invest is like telling a drowning person to take swimming lessons. Let's talk about the machine that keeps this going. Because poverty doesn't persist by accident. In the United States, the tax code has over 70,000 pages. And the longer it gets, the more it tilts in one direction. Warren Buffett famously admitted he pays a lower effective tax rate than his secretary. Not because he's doing anything illegal. Because the system taxes labor at higher rates than it taxes capital. If you work for your money, you're taxed at up to 37%. If your money works for you, through stock dividends, capital gains, carried interest, you might pay as little as 15%. The American tax code was largely written by the wealthy for the wealthy. It's not a conspiracy. It's lobbying. It's access. It's the simple, unsexy truth that power protects itself. And then there's the inheritance machine. Economists call it intergenerational wealth transfer. The rest of us call it being born lucky. A child born in the top 20% of income in America has a roughly 70% chance of staying in the top half. A child born in the bottom 20% has less than a 10% chance of reaching the top income tier in their lifetime. The U.S., the land of opportunity, has lower economic mobility than Denmark, Norway, Canada, and most of Western Europe. The American dream is more likely to come true if you're born in Copenhagen. There's one more trap, and this one might be the most insidious of all. The media we consume is engineered to make us believe poverty is always temporary, that the exception proves the rule. Every story of a kid from the projects who becomes a billionaire is amplified 1,000 times. Every story of a person who worked hard their entire life and still died broke is invisible. This is called survivorship bias, and it's deployed deliberately to keep people believing that the system is fair, that if you just hustle harder, invest smarter, wake up earlier, your turn is coming. Because if people truly understood how rigged the odds are, they wouldn't keep playing the game quietly. They demand to change it. Here is the truth that no politician, no self-help guru, and no motivational poster will ever tell you. Poverty is not a personal failure. It is the default outcome of a system that was designed, through centuries of enclosure, colonialism, tax policy, and cognitive warfare, to concentrate wealth upward and keep it there. That doesn't mean individual choices don't matter. They do. But individual choices operate inside a structure. And right now, that structure has a gravitational pull toward the bottom for the majority and toward the top for a few. The first step to changing that isn't working harder. It's understanding clearly, with eyes wide open, what you're actually working inside. Because you cannot fix a problem you've been trained not to see. If this made you think differently about the world, share it with someone who needs to see it. And if you want to go deeper, explore how the global banking system was built to serve the top 1%. Because the story doesn't end here. It's just getting started.